Hey, what's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Today we're going to be talking about the integration of the Maschine with FL Studio. Now, my goal today is to convince you by the end of this video that this is the deepest hardware integration to ever exist for FL Studio. It's going to be a long video because there's a ton of features to dive into, like browsing the browser, pulling up your plugin, playing scales, changing presets, in Omnisphere here you could even change scenes. We can go to chords. I like that. But yeah, this is part of the reason it's going to be a long video, because I'll be having way too much fun along the way. Let's look at the touch strip here. We can pitch up and down. Mod wheel. I don't think you can hear it that well on that one. Let's try this. Yeah, so a bunch of stuff you can do. Let's take a look at pad mode. We can actually change the color of the channel and the pad at the same time. Alright, so a lot of things to talk about, and without further ado, let's just get into it. Alright, let's take a look at how we would set this all up. Go to Mikey.audio to download your copy here, and then open this archive, and you'll see that we have this folder, version 6.0. So go ahead and extract that and open the folder, and you'll see this .ncc file. You can double click it to open controller editor, or you can open it directly. Then go to File, open Configuration, and select your NCC file. You can close controller editor at this point. Now, depending on your operating system, you'll either go into the Mac OS or the Windows folder and run the installer. Alright, so now we have to open FL Studio. Go to Options, MIDI Settings. Now this integration supports 5 different machines: the Maschine Plus, the Mark III, the Mark II, and the Micro Mark III and the Micro Mark II. Right now I have the Maschine Plus plugged in, and I also have a Mark II plugged in. So that's what we'll see here in this input box and this output box. So if you look closely, you'll see there's actually 2 entries for the Maschine Plus. We have Maschine Plus Virtual here, and we have Maschine Plus MIDI here. And the one that we care about for the Maschine Plus is Maschine Plus Virtual. Okay, so to know what device name to look for your machine, you can go to Mikey.audio and check out the manual. So we'll go ahead and do that now so we can see where to find that. Go to the manual and then go to FL Studio settings under setup. So you'll see this chart here, and you look in this column here, the first column, to see what machine you have, and then to figure out what to select in the input box in FL Studio, you look in your second column. Now if you look closely, some of these cells have multiple entries, so that just depends on your operating system. So if I had a Mark III and I had a Mac, then I would look for Maschine Mark III Virtual Input for the input box. If I had a Maschine Mark III on Windows, I would look for Maschine Mark III Control MIDI. Okay, so the output column works the same way. Alright, so now we can go back into FL Studio, and now that we know which one we care about, Maschine Plus Virtual, we're going to assign a port number to it. Right now I have port number 0 assigned to it, and we want to make sure that this number that is assigned in the input box matches the one assigned in the output box. So if we look here, we have both of them on port 0. This port number does not matter, it can be whatever you want, as long as it's unique among all the entries in each box. So again, we have the Maschine Mark II in here, and we have a 1 for there, and we have a 1 up here in the output box, so they match, and that's all we care about. So we have the port number set, so now we have to set the controller type. So let's go to Maschine Plus Virtual. For that one, we want to look in our list here, and we'll see Mikey Maschine Mark II v6.0, and then the same for the Mark III. These appear here because we ran the installer. So for the Maschine Plus, we're gonna select Mikey Maschine Mark III version 6.0. Alright. And then for the Mark II, we would select the Mark II version. So once we do that, we're almost all set. We just have to make sure that this Omni Preview MIDI channel is set to 16 so that Omni Preview mode works, which we'll talk about later. Okay, so setup on a Mac is exactly the same as on Windows. We open our archive and we get the same folder here. Now, when we try to go run our installer, we're gonna see this message here that it can't be opened. So to get around that, you right click this folder, Mac OS, and select a new terminal at folder, and then type in source space security.sh and then press return. Okay, now we try to open this installer again, and we get a different message this time. We don't want to move it to trash, so we press cancel. Now we need to go into our security settings. Scroll down, and we can see installer.app here that was blocked. We just press open anyway, put our password in, and now we get this final dialog prompting us to open or move to trash, so we just press open, and now we have our installer. Alright, let's continue this demo with the Mark III. This channel button shows and hides the channel rack. This plugin button shows and hides the selected plugin. This arranger button shows and hides the playlist. This mixer button shows and hides the mixer. This browser button shows and hides the browser. If we hold select and press the browser button, we show and hide the plugin picker. Let's go back to browser. We can navigate the browser using this encoder. So we turn right and left to go down and up. We can push it right and left to navigate the browser tabs. To open a folder, we can press it. To re-trigger a sample, we press the sampling button. We can ascend out of the folder by pushing this encoder up and continue browsing. Let's say we find a sample that we like and we want to load it into the channel rack. We press this encoder to replace the selected channel. We can continue browsing for a new sample. And to add this sample to a new channel, we would use this file button to open the context menu, turn the encoder, and press it to select open in new channel. We can hold select and press this encoder to close that plugin if we want. And you can see as I load in samples, they show up here on the pads. So we can continue browsing and load as many samples as we like. Now these two buttons here are to change knob pages. So we're currently on the main knob page, and if I press the right button, we're on the step sequencer knob page, which we'll talk about more later when we get into step mode. Alright, now we have the settings button to show and hide the settings. This auto button will close all the open windows. And then we have this macro button, which controls pad sensitivity. So what this does is it lowers the trigger threshold for the pads, so you can touch them more gently and still trigger a sound. So this is great for when you're playing a melodic instrument, and it makes the pads more like a keyboard than like a drum machine. The scene button shows and hides the piano roll. This pattern button switches between pattern and song mode, and you can see the LEDs here change color to indicate the mode. This events button inserts markers into the playlist. This variation button is a modifier button, so we use it in combination with other controls. So if I hold this variation button and turn the encoder, I can navigate these markers. And I can use the events button to remove markers. This duplicate button copies and pastes. The select button is another modifier button. I can use it with pad 1 to undo, pad 2 to redo, and then I'll take a note off the grid to demonstrate quantize. So if I hold select and pad 5, I can quantize. This solo button is context dependent, and so is this mute button. So if I have my channel rack and I press solo, it'll solo the selected channel, and mute will mute the selected channel. But if I'm in the mixer, then the selected track is what's affected by these buttons. We can adjust the channel volume by holding this volume button here and turning the encoder. We can hold the swing button and turn the encoder to adjust the channel swing. We can hold the tempo button and turn the encoder to change the tempo. And we can hold this lock button and turn the encoder to change the snap. We can use this first knob to select the mixer track. We can use the second knob here to control the volume for that track. This third knob controls the pan, and holding select controls the stereo separation. Going back to this first knob, if we hold select, we can turn it to select a pattern. And we can create a new pattern by holding select and pressing pattern. Alright, let's take a look at this transport section. We'll start with this play button. Press it again to pause. Press again to resume. Use this restart button to restart. Use this record button to arm recording, and then press it again to disarm. Hold select and press the record button to enable count in. Do the same to disable it. Hold select and press this restart loop button to enable loop recording, and then press the same to disable it. We can enable the metronome with this follow button and disable with the same button. And then we can tap our tempo with this button here that says tap. And then we can stop with this stop button. Let's see what this erase button does. We'll pick an instrument, open the piano roll to view the notes, and then if we use this erase button, we can get rid of those notes. Alright, let's talk about pad modes. Pad modes allow these 16 pads to serve different purposes. I have all the available pad modes listed here on the left, and we'll go over them in a brief overview, but then I'll get into more details afterwards. So let's start off with our default mode, which is pad mode, and we can tell that we're in pad mode two different ways. We can see that this pad mode button is a bit brighter than the ones next to it, and this group button is a light blue color. Then we have our Omni preview mode, which we get to by pressing pad mode again, and we can see that our group color here is yellow. Then we have our mute mode, which we have to go back to our regular pad mode first to get into, and then we hold select and press mute, and we can see that the group button here is red, so we know we're in mute mode, and this allows us to mute our individual channels. Then we have solo mode, which we get to by holding select and pressing solo, and we see that this group button here is green, and we can solo our individual channels and unsolo them by pressing again. And then to get out of this mode, we can hold select and solo again, and we're back into regular pad mode. Now let's go to FX mode. We get there by pressing this perform effects button, and we can see a lime color for the group buttons here. And this allows us to assign mixer tracks to each individual channel. Then we have our keyboard mode here, which we get to by pressing keyboard, and we can see that we have a blue color here for the group buttons. Then we have our chord mode, which we get to by pressing this chords button, and we have a kind of purple color here for the group buttons. And then in chord mode, we have our default, which is harmony mode, which is what we're in currently. But then we also have chord set mode, which we get to by pressing this chord set button up here. And we can see that we have a kind of pink color for the group buttons here. And then we have our final mode, which is step mode, and we get there by pressing this step button, and we have an orange color for our group buttons here. Alright, let's take a closer look at pad mode. In pad mode, we use the pads to select channels. Right now channel 1 is selected, so pad 1 is brighter than the rest. We can select channel 2 by hitting pad 2. We can select the third channel by hitting the third pad, and so on. You notice that when I hit a pad, you can hear the sound of that channel. And by default, the note that sound is played at is C5. And you can change that with these semitone and octave knobs. But that affects all of the pads. So what if we only wanted to change the audition note of one channel? Like this one, for instance. Well, first we would use the semitone and octave knobs to select the note that we want to audition. Let's say we just want to go up one semitone. Then we can latch that note in by holding note repeat and the pad. So now that note is latched in. So even if I turn the semitone up, it stays at that note. Same with the octave. So I'm going to put these back to 0. And our note is still latched in. To reset the pad back to default, which is auditioning note C5, we use the same button combination. We hold note repeat and we hit the pad. And now it'll be back to the default, which is C5. And again, it will respond to semitone and octave at this point. We can also customize the color of each pad and the corresponding channel. We do that by holding the variation button and pressing the pad. And we can do multiple pads at once. And you can see that the corresponding channels have changed their colors to match the pads. To reset the channel color and the pad color, there's a shortcut, which is to hold variation, select, and the pad. The pad will go back to white, and the channel will go back to gray or uncolored. Now these colors propagate to the other pad modes, which we'll see shortly, but just to give you a sneak peek, I'll select the channel, and I'll switch to keyboard mode, and we can see that all the pads are that color. Same with chords mode, and same with step mode, as long as we have steps in there. Now I said before that the main purpose of pad mode is to select channels, but there are a couple other ways to select channels for convenience. So right now, since the channel rack is focused, I can actually just turn this encoder to select my different channels. If the mixer was focused, then I would be changing mixer tracks instead of channels. And then there's one more way to change channels, which is to nudge this encoder up and down. And for this, the focus doesn't matter. So I can focus the mixer and still be able to change channels by nudging up and down. Right now we have 8 channels in the channel rack, so only these first 8 pads are lit. The second 8 pads are not lit since there are no corresponding channels for them. And we can see on this screen here that the first 8 rectangles are white since those pads have corresponding channels, and the second 8 rectangles are black since those pads don't have corresponding channels. In the channel rack, we could select each channel and the corresponding pad is highlighted, and we could select multiple channels and those pads get highlighted. If we mute a channel, we see that the channel's pad gets unlit, but yet still on the screen here we can see that the corresponding rectangle, which is 1 in this case, is still white. And that's because there is a channel there, but it's just muted. Whereas for pad 9, for example, that's black because there's no channel there at all. Even though we have 16 physical pads here, we can still access up to 128 different channels at a time using these group buttons here. So let's go ahead and clone these channels. So now we have 32 channels. We can access the first 16 on group A, and then we can go to group B here to get to the next 16. Alright, let's talk about Omni Preview Mode. To get to Omni Preview Mode, we press this Pad Mode button while we're already in Pad Mode, and we can see here that the group button turns yellow, so we know we're in Omni Preview Mode. This mode is almost identical to Pad Mode, but with a few differences. The first difference is that when you press a pad, you're no longer selecting that pad's channel, but you could still hear the sound. So this mode is great for finger drumming. For drumming, I keep the macro button off and I turn it back on for melodic instruments. Another difference is that in Omni Preview Mode, you can access up to 121 channels instead of 128 that you can access in Pad Mode. And that's just because of the limitations of Omni Preview Mode, the way it works under the hood. So what it's doing is it takes MIDI notes and it matches them up with channels and triggers the channel corresponding to the MIDI note that you're triggering. So because of this and the limited number of MIDI notes, you have a limited number of channels that you can access. And another limitation as a result of this is you can't assign custom notes to the pads like you can in Pad Mode. But to work around that, you can actually open up the channel that you want to change the root note for. Let's say we want to do it for this channel, and we go up here and we just right click the new root note that we want. So if I want to change that note, I can put it down an octave, for instance, and the sound ends up going up an octave. So if I put the root note up an octave, you get the sound down an octave. So that's one way to work around that limitation, but there's many ways to do this, of course, and an alternative to even using this mode would just be to use FPC and then use keyboard mode, which we'll see shortly. But anyways, just remember that in Omni Preview Mode, you need to have your Omni Preview channel set to 16. So we can see that in MIDI settings here, Omni Preview MIDI channel is 16. Alright, now it's time to look at solo mode and mute mode. So first we go to Pad Mode, and then to get into solo mode, we hold select and press solo. Now by pressing a pad, we can solo that pad's channel during playback. Then we can leave solo mode by holding select and pressing solo again, or while we're in that mode, we can go directly to mute mode by holding select and pressing mute. And this mode is similar. Now by pressing a pad, we can mute that pad's channel during playback. Yeah, this mode is fun. We can leave mute mode by holding select and pressing mute. Alright, let's take a look at FX mode. To get there, we press this Perform FX Select button, and now we can use the pads to assign mixer tracks to each channel. So let's say I want to take this rim shot and send it to a track that has a phaser on it. It's as simple as this. And then let's say I take that hi-hat and just send it to a delay track. Alright, let's talk about keyboard mode. We get there by pressing this keyboard button, and this mode allows us to play individual notes. It provides virtually any musical scale you could ask for. It contains all the scales in Maschine software, and it even allows you to add custom scales and save them, which I'll demo shortly. So let's listen to some of these scales. We start off in this chromatic scale by default. In total, we have 8 groups of 16 scales. You can see on this screen here the names of the 8 different classes of scales: main, modes, jazz, world, 5-tone, modern, major, and minor. They're all on the left side of the label. And we get to each of those groups using these group buttons here, A through H. So right now we're in our default main class of scales. So we use this 5th knob here to change the scale. So let's go right one. So we have a major scale here, and as we turn this scale knob, we can see up in the right corner in the hint panel, it tells us the name of the scale that we're in. So we have a minor scale there. And so on. And you'll notice as I go through the different scales, the pad lighting changes. And so you can see the brighter pads here, they represent each root note occurrence in the scale. So it's the root note at different octaves. And just by looking at the way the pads are highlighted, I could tell right away that this is a pentatonic or a 5-tone scale. To see the exact name of the scale that you're in, you can just touch this knob and it'll tell you up top in the hint panel. You can also transpose your scales using the octave and semitone knobs up here. I'll go up 1 octave. I can go down 1 octave. And I can also change my semitone. Up and down. So the semitone can go up 12 semitones and down 12 semitones. And then the octave can go up 3 octaves and down 3 octaves. So together you can go up to 4 octaves in either direction. You can always tell what key you're in up here in the hint panel by touching the semitone knob. Let's check out some more of the scales in this group. So when you get up to 16, these are your custom scales. So you have up to 8 custom scales, each in groups A through H. So you can see that the pads here have a checkered highlighting pattern. This is to make it obvious that you're looking at a custom scale. And so I can go to group B here and have another custom scale all the way to H. And so now we'll look at how to define our own custom scales and save them. So open up the piano roll and then draw in the 16 notes that you want in your custom scale. Then go up here, File, Export as MIDI file, and save this as s1.mid. The S stands for scale, and the 1 just means that it'll end up in the first group, which is group A. You can name this s8.mid so that it ends up in group H. and you can name it S2, S3, S4, and so on, .mid. So we'll save this, and now we open up the provided generator app, and we navigate to where we just saved that MIDI file with this browse button, and then we press generate scales. Now we have to go to view, script output, and reload the script. You could also restart FL Studio to reload the script. Now if we go back to keyboard mode and go all the way up to scale 16, we'll hear the custom scale that we just made. Custom scales can be useful for mapping pad assignments in drum plugins like FPC. Alright, let's talk about chord mode. We get there by pressing this chords button, and now we can use the pads to play chords. We start off with the chromatic scale, and with the first and third notes of that scale comprising our chord. So let's change this to a major scale and see what that sounds like. Minor scale, harmonic minor, and so on. We have all of the scales that we had available in keyboard mode and chord mode. So that means we have access to all 8 of these groups of 16 scales. Let's go back to our major scale, and let's change the notes that make up our scale using these buttons up here. The first 7 buttons we'll consider harmony mode, and we'll go ahead and listen to what those sound like. So let's listen to the 1 and 5. 1, 3, 5. 1, 3, 5, 7. 1, 4, 5. 1, 4, 7. And octave. Let's go back to the 1, 3, 5. And we can use this position knob to change the position of our chord. So once we change the position, we're essentially inverting the chord to our first position. Second position. And third position. We can also affect our chords with this octave and semitone knob. And whenever we play a chord, the name of the chord is shown up here in the hint panel. We get to chord set mode by pressing this chord sets button here. And chord sets are groups of chords that sound good together musically, and they're great for inspiration and for getting ideas on chord progressions. So we have a bunch of chord sets built in groups A through G, and then group H is where you can put your own custom chord sets. So we'll just pick a random group in a random chord set and see what that sounds like, and then take a look at how we can make our own chord sets and load them in. So I'll pick F and set 3. So by the way, this knob that we were using before for scales is now being used to choose the chord set. So when we're in chord set mode, that's the purpose of this knob. So let's see what this sounds like. In chord set mode, we can use the octave and semitone knobs. But the position knob we don't use in chord set mode. In chord set mode, we can look at the right half of these labels up here to see what kind of chord sets we can expect. So in group A here, we would expect R&B types of chord sets. In group C here, we would expect jazz types of chord sets. And then in this last group here, we have our custom chord sets. They're empty now, but we'll go ahead and take a look at how we would fill them in. The process is the same as when we added custom scales earlier. So we open up our piano roll, we draw in some chords, and I have some drawn in here already. Let's listen to that. Then we go up to here, File, Export as MIDI file, and we'll save this as c1.mid. So this time we name them with the letter C instead of S, and C stands for chords. And we can go all the way up to 16 this time instead of 8, because we have 16 custom chord sets that we can support with this knob right here. So I'll name this c1.mid and I'll save it. Then we can open up our trusty generator tool. And this time we'll press generate chords. And then we go up to view, script output, reload script. And then we can go back into chords, chord sets, and group H. And now we can expect our chords on these first 4 pads. Alright, let's talk about step mode. We get there by pressing the step button, and now we can use the pads to interact with the step sequencer. Right now we have 4 steps of the kick drum activated, and we can deactivate 2 of them by pressing their pads. Pressing the pads again will reactivate them. We can use these group buttons here to get to the next set of steps and insert a step there. We can use this encoder to rotate the pattern by nudging it right or left. We also have a dedicated knob page for step mode, and we get there using these arrows. This page allows us to control our graph editor parameters. This high range button allows us to access more values for the given parameter. The parameters that have a corresponding reset button allows us to quickly reset the value back to default for that parameter. We can change our channel filter type with this last button here. And in the hint panel, we can see the type of filter. The mod X and mod Y parameters control the... Sorry, I'm distracted because this beat is so corny. Let me turn off this one instrument. Alright. So this mod X and this mod Y parameter, they control the cutoff frequency and the resonance of that channel filter, respectively. But these parameters only work for sample channels. If you have a melodic instrument, you can use the snap to scale function to snap to your set scale, which is whatever this knob is set to. So we can go to a major scale, and if we leave the octave and semitone on 0, then we know we're at a C major scale. So now when we go back to this page, as we enter notes in, we can keep them snapped to the scale and basically create our own arpeggios. Alright, let's talk about the touch strip. By default, the touch strip allows us to seek through our pattern or song. We can enter pitch mode to control our channel pitch. We can enter mod mode to use the touch strip as a mod wheel. We can enter notes mode to use the touch strip to play notes. We can even play chords with the touch strip by going into chord mode. And let's go back to keyboard mode. And by default, these notes are played without sustain, but you can add a sustain pedal to sustain those notes. To get back to seek mode, we just get out of the mode that we're in by pressing that modes button. And now we can continue to seek through our song. By default, the pads are velocity sensitive. But we can enable fixed velocity with this button, and now the pads will play at whatever the velocity setting is on this knob. So right now we have 127 or full velocity. And we can control the velocity with this knob. The touch strip is not velocity sensitive, but it will play the notes at whatever velocity you have set on this velocity knob. So I'll go to notes mode and I'll turn the velocity all the way up and play notes. I can turn the velocity down, let's say about halfway. And the sound is softer. We can cycle through our effects that we have on our currently selected mixer track by holding select and nudging this encoder up or down. So here's our first effect, and we can close that by holding select and pushing this encoder, and then we can continue cycling through and close that as well. As we cycle through, we don't have to close it, we can leave them open. We have a shortcut to open Edison on our current track by holding select and pressing sampling. We can also save our project by holding select and pressing file. Thank you guys for sticking with me to the end of this video. I know it was a long video. I tried not to make it too long, so I left some details out. You can visit the website mikey.audio to get the rest of the details. And if you'd like to support me, all I ask is that you please share the video and subscribe.